Okay, presenting now live from the Amsterdam office is Omar H. Salam, who is a senior product manager over at Booking.com on the topic of managing data as a product.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you, Steve, for this intro, and I hope someday I would be as a good public speaker as you are. So yeah, it's really great to be here, back here at Peter. It used to be a booking office, and thank you so much for the invite to join you at the TechFest. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about managing data as a product. Mainly, the whole thing is about pure product craft and how to apply it to data. But let me tell you a little bit about myself first. So yeah, my name is Omar. Steve said I've been into product management for about 7 years. I originally come from Egypt, and I was just telling Maria that I recently came to Amsterdam here to join Booking.com a year and a half ago. And one of the main reasons is that I like the weather here, because I've been feeling hot for 34 years of my life, and finally I am at the right place. So I've been around a little bit. I've worked in different locations, different companies. Throughout my product experience, I've worked in a couple of startups back in Egypt. I worked in the Gulf, across the Middle East. And the most recent experiences, I worked in Jumia, which is Africa's Amazon. And also I worked in Delivery Hero for some time. And I've always worked with different industries and different use cases, different sets of problems. And I always like to think of myself as a generalist product manager and just try to focus as much as possible on the product craft itself. So when I joined Booking, I was hired to join the location intelligence team. And from the name and from what I understood during the interviews, I had this idea that, okay, location intelligence, maps, directions, this kind of thing. And and I started fantasizing about, okay, how to build all of these different experiences and how to deliver these, values to support customers when they're trying to plan for their trips, right? But when I joined and I started to get onboarded, I found out that Booking is much larger than I thought. The size, the product community over there, we have like more than 400 product teams. And with that kind of scale, with that kind of wide set of use cases, you start getting teams that are working on very small specifics that you didn't really understand before you get in. So I found out that the location intelligence team is working on managing geodata. And there are no user experience design to it. There is no the normal design process into it. It's all about data. And I started to think, okay, I've never worked on a data product right now. How do we manage data? Because all I could think about data before are like, data science, analytics, so on. And I didn't really understand, okay, what am I supposed to do here? And to couple that with imposter syndrome, it was like, the craziest onboarding experience ever. So I started looking a little bit more into what could work here, what are we trying to do exactly, especially that this kind of product that we are building, it's strictly infrastructure, and it's not really easy to understand how to directly impact customers with that, how to come up with metrics for that, and so on. So I started doing my own research, trying to learn more about this, given my previous experience of like trying to understand new domains and new business cases each and every time I worked at a place. So I started doing that again, but with data. And I stumbled upon this concept of managing data as a product, and that's what I want to talk about today. So, but first, let's talk about why data is important. So in 2013, this statement came up that 90% of the data that we have right now in the world was mostly created in the last 2 years. And this statement has been true and has been revalidated each and every year since then. Because with all the new businesses, all the new apps with the increasing trends of users getting more on their phones and having everything and every single detail of your life on your phone or on your computer, the data sets around the world with all the businesses and everything has been increasing exponentially in crazy rates. So that established that if data sets are identified, recognized, and used in the best way possible, it could actually be one of the very most important assets of any organization. So talking about this huge volumes of data, what possibly could be, the challenges of this? Generally, most companies face a lot of problems with data and trying to organize them and trying to manage them because data can be fragmented across various systems, and that comes from the especially companies that have been there for like a long time, more than 5 years or 10 years, and things were starting small at the beginning. And when you're trying to scale up, you're just trying to focus on the experience that you're building, and you're just building some schemas here and there to manage your own data, and that's it. But you end up with scaling and with bigger operations and so on. You end up with fragmented sets of data that are captive in different applications and different systems across the organization itself. And it ends up being locked into that legacy structure, and it wouldn't be easily accessible, not even visible at some points. And definitely when you have this state of fragmentation, your data sets wouldn't be compliant to any kind of compliance policies that nowadays we really have to to go with. And of course, since different teams and different mindsets and different people are trying to build these fragmented data sets, they are not structured in a standardized way whatsoever. The end result of that is that the majority of the data that any organization would acquire or would have is not really quantified, and it's considered what we call dark data. Dark data, the problem with dark data is it doesn't give you the ability to drive proper business decisions based on that data, because you cannot really see it, or you cannot really put it together and harness the power of these data sets, right? And you cannot really use it to improve the customer experience at scale or your operations at scale. All in all, it's weighing the company down with a lot of lost potential. So this is the main problem with fragmented data. Now, I came across this concept of data mesh. It was introduced for the first time in, I think, 2020 by Damag Zagani. She's a brilliant writer, and she wrote this book about data mesh. And the main concept here is she's stating that data that are relevant to specific domains should be owned by these domains owners, as they are the most experts on this very specific type of data. So let's take an example of what I just stated about my work, geodata. Geodata is very important to booking and to the user experience, and later on with the slides, I will discuss why it was important. But previously, across the years, it was managed separately with different teams for whoever is trying to build anything really, any kind of experience that would require geodata to be involved. But now we have a team dedicated for that. We have specialists that are working on how to manage this data, and they are really specialized with geospatial data because they are the best people to understand how to manage it and what kind of value and impact would come out of it. And they would be the best people to understand how to define quality standards for this data. So that's the concept that Damag Zagani presented, is that data should be centrally decentralized somehow. So it should be centralized with business domains that are specialized in this kind of data, but it should be decentralized from being like, just technically mapped to just, a centralized schema, and that's it. And in order to do that, in order to apply and to build a data mesh that is more business oriented, there are four main principles that you presented. First one is that data should be managed as a product. And that's the main topic that we're talking about here. Second is that data ownership and architecture, as I told you, is domain oriented, and it's decentralized from the whole company scope, but it's centralized within this the domain expertise. And the ultimate state of any data infrastructure or a data platform is that it would be self-serve platform at some point. That would minimize any kind of friction for teams that are trying to consume and use this data. And the fourth thing is that data governance is federated. So since it's business domain relevant, yes, there has to be standards across the organization, but again, every single business domain, they determine how to really govern this kind of data relevant to the type and relevant to the nature of this data set. So here we're talking, and even when I was beginning this presentation, I said that I'm working on a data product, right? But when we're having a deep dive here, there is a difference between these two terminologies, data product and data as a product. And it's important to understand this, just to understand the difference and the significance of why do we want to manage data as a product. So a data product normally is a product that uses data to operate. It uses data to power the user experiences built within that product, and usually data is managed within a silo or like independently from any other bigger structures. So if we're talking about, again, the geo example, let's take an example with Google. So Google Maps itself, the user experience, the front end that you see as a user, this is a data product. And it powers over the other geodata that Google has. So that's a separate product. Data as a product, where data is the product itself. Data is optimized and managed to produce more impactful data, higher quality of data, more use case relevant data to a very specific use cases. As I was saying, data is the first class product. And the goal for this is to make sure that data is discoverable, addressable, trustworthy, and secure. So what would we do normally is that, yes, we have a stock of data. We source that. We are trying to make sure that we have the proper pipelines, we have the proper governance standards, and we have the proper alignments with all of the teams where we are trying to source the data, manage the data itself, to maintain it and make sure that it's meeting quality standards, that we have proper coverage to what we like to have, and we are able to securely, safely, and easily serve it to other teams. Whether we did reach this ultimate state of self-serve platform or we still have to do it use case by use case, but this is the foundation that we have to serve. And then, depending on the use cases itself, we start working on tailored solutions, maybe some intelligent solutions, building layers of machine learning to increase the quality and elevate the quality of data relevant to specific use cases that we would like to serve. All of that is good, but how to actually apply product management on this? Because at the end of the day, it's not the straightforward product management we're talking about. It's not easy to identify what problems the customers are having. It's not easy to do a normal design thinking process. It's important not to look at the easily administratable way to apply a framework, but it's more important to look at what this framework means, why it was created, and what it's actually, aiming for. So, for example, let's take the design thinking model, these double diamonds. I'm sure that everyone have seen that, worked with that before. And the main purpose for this is um, to apply a way for your thinking itself. It doesn't have to be that you're designing some front-end experience. It doesn't have to be that you're designing something visible or tangible, but it's a way of thinking. And this way of thinking is focusing on how can we solve problems for customers to give them a better user experience, right? It's focusing on the needs and problems before even considering any type of solutions or any ideas that would create solutions. It's kind of a way to manage also your biases on a personal level. So in order to apply that on data, you have to start working a lot with your different stakeholders to identify what are the problems, what are their needs with this kind of data. You also have to work a lot with the business operations stakeholders that are managing the data itself to understand what this also means for them, how to identify what quality is, what are they trying to achieve, and the kind of solutions that they are trying to build, the data that they are trying to source, how to prioritize that, and all of that, to be able to apply this process of empathizing, defining the problem statements, coming up with solutions, prototyping, experimenting with them, and finally releasing them, right? So one of the very first steps that would be the base of how you could properly work with data as a product is to ask yourself, how might we deliver the best user experience? This is the very first step, trying to identify your problem space and tying it to the end goal at the end, because that's the reason why you are doing this. So in order to identify, even at the very beginning, which type of data is worth investing time in, you need to, on an organizational level, start to ask yourself, how can we deliver the best user experience? And from that, you would assess these 5 factors and start identifying, okay, so this type of data is important for us. And the importance is related to business value and relevancy. So again, as I told you, geodata is extremely important for Booking.com because it's really related to where everything is and how can we support users and customers to plan their trips and take decisions to plan their trips, right? But for takeaway here, for example, a different kind of data might be more relevant and more important. Strategic importance, customer experience relevancy, as I told you, horizontal need across the organization. So by interviewing and talking to as much technical and product stakeholders, you would be able, as you can, you would be able to identify the need for specific type of data to meet some standard quality, or there are problems that are happening here and there. And data availability and quality, of course, because if you're trying to manage data that you cannot generate or you cannot source from a third party or anything like that, you wouldn't really have a product to work with, right? And one of the easiest ways to identify, especially in legacy companies that have been operating for a couple of years, is trying to track the inconsistencies across your user experience and trying to find out, okay, why these are happening, and trying to narrow down the types of data that might contribute into that. So for example, the story behind geodata in Booking is that at some point it was really obvious that because of geodata, some experiences were inconsistent, and it was really affecting the decision-making process for users, and also like implying some negative experience all over there. So for example, you're trying to book a hotel and then you go to try to book a car after that, but the distance between 2 locations on the 2 sides are not the same, for example. The calculations were not accurate. The listings for what's nearby, what's closest to the things that you could enjoy, or attractions you could visit, were not always consistent or across the experience. And that's because each and every single part of the overall experience was owned by a different team, and they were managing their geodata separately. So these are the factors that you would decide with which type of data would be worth it to focus on managing as a product. Once you decide this, you start defining your scope. So we've defined the data set itself. Let's define our scope to start working on it. So you would decide which type of data set and what's the purpose for managing this, as I told you. You need to have a clear value proposition on how it would contribute to have a better user experience. And then the second most important thing is to define ownership of this data. When you're creating a new team or creating a new scope for data management, usually this data is, as we said, fragmented and scattered everywhere across the organization. So you really need within your scope definition to define who should be owning which type of data, which is probably the new team, and to actually apply this and get the management and leadership support to acquire ownership of this data from different teams and try to have some sort of a program or something to migrate all of that to a centralized location where you have proper visibility of it, so you could do any kind of management for it. You would also need to define the need for different groups of stakeholders. So the operations teams that are working on managing and serving the data, this data set would have different set of needs, probably related to tooling and infrastructures and how to design the taxonomy and so on, than the direct consumers for this type of data, and also the indirect customers that you're trying to proxy impact to. You would need to design and assess your infrastructure and pipelines to make sure that all of this is flowing seamlessly and you have good control over it. And you would need to, along with your stakeholders, to design the whole taxonomy and make sure that it's scalable enough to accommodate potential use cases that you don't really know about, and making sure that it could be scaled without any problems. Only then, when you have these defined, you would start working on defining the actual problems that are happening on ground with this data set related to quality, accessibility, security, compliance, etc., etc. But you need to have the base of the previous points to be able to proceed with problem definition and then designing solutions for it. A very important thing that I've been saying already for a couple of times is how to proxy your impact. What does that mean? In any kind of product management, whether it's front end, back end, whatever, you will always be asked on how can you deliver impact to our customers? How can you define metrics to measure, your impact and so on? And this can be particularly challenging for managing data as a product, because at the end of the day, you're working with data. It's there in the infrastructure. It's under the hood. No one sees it, and no one's know what's going on. And you are serving horizontally across the organization. So you cannot really say that when I manage this type of data, it's gonna increase conversions, because it's not that direct, or it's gonna increase customer satisfaction, or it's gonna increase that, because you don't actually have this direct impact to anything, right? So you have to proxy your impact, and your mission really is to provide the best user experience to your direct consumers, that are the product and tech teams inside the organization. So they would be able to build user experiences to the indirect customers, which are, the normal users of the app or your platform. Delivering impact to indirect customers. But what's the best user experience for direct consumers is making sure that this data is consumable, it's visible, they can easily track it, and they can easily consume it and use it, and you make sure that the quality is always high. So in order to do this, first thing, you need to share your ownership of the whole domain the strategy, goals, and metrics with your business operations team. You cannot, as a product and tech side, you cannot work independently from the business operations that are trying to manage the data itself. Even if the hierarchy is different, the reporting lines are different, we shouldn't really care about this because at the end of the day, that's the shared product that you are trying to improve. And you should always be included and closely tied to the consumers of your data across the organization in order to understand the exact use cases that they are trying to serve with the data that they are consuming from you. So then the next step you would be able to do is that you would be able to group the different kind of metrics or impact that these teams are trying to achieve at some point, and that will lead to focusing your impact and funneling your impact into some specific metrics that you could use within your prioritization matrix at some point. And that's really the way to try to proxy. Sometimes you have to do 2-3 different levels of proxying before reaching the 2-3 metrics that you would be really focusing on for this year's strategy. And it's a long process, but the base for all of that is stakeholder communication and management, really. As I said, if your product is good enough, no one would really notice that you're even there in the company. No one would understand the importance for it because no one would feel any problem, right? But they would only know that you exist once something fails, once something breaks, and a user experience is not working enough. So that always puts the question of how to get strategic support and leadership support for this. Because, as you said, impact is not easily relatable. You cannot really easily relate to annual objectives and these cool objectives that are shared on very good-looking decks. But the other way to do it is, presenting risk frameworks. And asking the question of what would happen if this breaks. And then you would start having these potential scenarios and hypothetical scenarios of if something breaks, what kind of user experience it would affect, what kind of market share it would affect. And running these, trying to find numbers for these and impact for these different scenarios would be the way to prove that this data set is valuable, this data set is worth managing as a product, this is worth investing in to create a team or to justify your strategy for a couple of years, and so on. So basically, the key takeaways from this talk is that depending on how data is treated, as we said, it could be one of the most valuable assets for any organization. And as we said, the data mesh is a framework to balance data centralization and decentralization to be more business domain oriented, just to make sure that the people that are mostly specialized in a specific business domain are the best people to handle the data within it. Data product is consuming data, or data as a product is treating data as a first-class product itself and trying to improve it, to serve it to other use cases. And product thinking and design thinking principles would make a huge difference when you're trying to manage this kinds of products and trying to proxy impact within it. So yeah, thank you so much, and I'm ready for your questions.
Thank you very much indeed. I believe we have live in Amsterdam as well a Q&A host in Martin Dubois, product owner, growth marketing at Jet.
Hey guys, first of all, thanks for the talk. If there are any questions, can we put them on the screen? If not, you can still enter them through Slido. I did have a few questions myself though. Yeah. One of the things, so in data mesh, you're talking about a balance between centralizing data and decentralizing data.
Yeah.
How do you handle your most core KPIs if you're using a data mesh? So for example, for us, one of our most important KPIs is the number of orders that we do. How do you handle that in the structure where there is a balance between what is centralized and decentralized?
So again, when you're talking about the data mesh specifically and how to manage this data technically, you're basically focusing on the technical KPIs like SLAs and SLOs, uptime, reliability, and all of that. And you're having a federated, standardized way to govern how to structure this data mesh, and the standards that it should apply to is the way to make sure that although you're decentralized a little bit, but still everything is following the same standards, it's following the same structure, and that would help you to have like the baseline that everything is managed the same way everywhere. So on top of that, you could start relating to any kind of business metrics easily once you are sure that you have this consistency in your infrastructure.
So it's about the underlying structure, make sure that everything's consistent, and then you can build a sort of reporting layer on top of that structure.
Exactly.
So you were also talking about design thinking, especially related to data as a product. I was wondering if you could give some examples on what kind of workshops you did with your stakeholder. How did that workshop look like? And did it maybe give you more buy-in from your stakeholder as data as a product in general?
Yeah, so as I said, the biggest part of this on the product side is communication with all kinds of stakeholders, whether they're direct, indirect, consuming your data or managing your data and so on. So it's what I do usually is that I plan these set of workshops annually to make sure that either we are ideating for our strategy or checking the progress of our strategy, but it includes someone, at least one person from every side of the business that I'm dealing with. Again, whether managing or I'm serving this data to them, just to make sure that we are relating to all the different use cases, and we are working towards that. So having a structured way to communicate with everyone and to include everyone in the same discussion would make it easier to reach what you want to achieve exactly. And design thinking, as I said, is a framework of thought on what are the steps that we should follow as a group together to reach the realization, because it doesn't really promise what are you going to build at the end, but it's just a way of thinking on what are the steps you should be taking, what's the process in order to have answers to your questions.
All right. I had one more thing. So we also quickly touched upon risk frameworks.
Yeah.
We have one question from the audience. In the data as a product model, how does Booking consistently enhance their data quality?
So I cannot speak for all different types of data across Booking, but yeah, the value of what I've been saying of that having domain experts managing specific types of data, one of the benefits for that is that they would be able to assess how do we either increase the quality of the data that we have, or how to get better sets of data, how to make sure that we are sourcing them from the right resources and so on, because they're the experts on that. So you either buy a ready set of data after validating that it's exactly what you need, or you work, you have support from data scientists, machine learning scientists to work on models that would enhance the quality of these data sets to serve the use cases. And it has to be most relevant to the use cases that you're trying to serve, just to make sure that you're maximizing your impact. So you either buy it ready and then capitalize on that, or try to work internally with data science and machine learning to increase the quality of it.
That makes sense. Then there was another question. For already existing products, analyzing reviews data from end users is useful. How does Booking use customer reviews from various sources like Google or Trustpilot, Yelp?
Let me read it again just to make sure that I understood it. Okay, cool. So that's what we refer to as user-generated content, whether it's reviews, text reviews, or includes images or videos and so on. What we're trying to work on is we try to understand these reviews and try to separate the different types of data it includes. So text goes into some text recognition, and we try to absorb some keywords out of it. We try to understand the pictures separately and then tie both together to understand them together. So what the picture means and the text means and so on. And that feeds into different pipelines of feedback to understand, the customer experience all in all, but also to help us identify how could we understand and manage specific types of data in a better way. And we try to group all of that to make sure we understand our customers better somehow.
Nice. We have a question from the audience.
Yeah.
Thanks, Omar, for the great presentation.
Thank you.
A lot of nice insights. And we are also working with data products, so it was nice to relate what you're doing at Booking. I have a bit different question from different perspective. So you mentioned that you joined Booking 1.5 years ago, and you didn't expect it to be so huge.
Yeah.
Speaking as an ex-Booking.com employee as well, I was wondering, how was your experience of delivering an impact in such a big organization with relatively small time?
Again, the key is the stakeholder communication. So 80% of my time I'm chasing people here and there to have discussions with them on what we can provide as a team with our product and what would be relevant use cases to them. And there are two ways to that, especially when you're trying to manage a data product, you have a data set. You might fall in the trap of always being on the receiving end of requests, and you're just trying to fulfill, teams reaching out to you, trying to find things, but you also from the other side have to promote your team, promote your what you have. And with a lot of communication, you will start reaching a level of proactively thinking about use cases that could benefit teams that maybe they didn't really think about, or maybe they're just strategically working to have ideas like that in the future. But maybe you could start proactively reaching out to them, telling them that, okay, if you want to do this, maybe we can give you that, or we have these capabilities that would enable you to build this kind of experience or this kind of feature. So the more you invest in communicating with different teams, they would know more about what they can get out of you, and also you would start having these ideas on how to do that with them. And by being more and more involved in the other team's strategic planning, somehow just being an observer, for example, to their strategy workshops and something like that, you would be more in touch with what the different teams are trying to deliver and how you can support them as well. And then you could start organizing other workshops that would include these teams, because you already did this grouping to find out some metrics and KPIs, right? But you also do this grouping for potential use cases. And you include teams that have use cases that might be close together, and run with them these discussions on how they can benefit from your platform and so on. So you go through this process, and that's how by time you start increasing your impact with data.
Yeah. Does that answer your question? Good to hear. All right. Adding to the previous question, what role does data governance play within a data as a product model?
Managing data as a product is data governance. So basically your role is building a data governance program for this specific type of data and applying it and making sure that you have the infrastructure that would enable that, the infrastructure that would give you proper control, visibility over the whole flow, and maybe building also some other solutions on top of that, whether it's data models, machine learning models, maybe some minimal tooling or something like that, even promoted as a service platform at some point to establish this kind of data governance. So that's the main mission of managing data as a product, is to reach the highest state of data governance possible. So all the principles of how to apply data governance is actually guiding points on how to manage data as a product as well.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Then question from Ravi. I think he's in the audience here, so he can just ask it himself.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the presentation. My question is, do you have any examples of data teams in Booking that were not working with this data as a product mindset, but rather transition to it? And if yes, then how did it go? What challenges they faced and how long it took?
Okay, cool. So again, the example that I'm always using with GeoData, so my team didn't exist 4 years ago. It wasn't there. And GeoData was scattered all across everywhere in the legacy. And it took, so the team started forming and then it changed a couple of times. So we could say that it took about 3 years to reach a state where we're talking that maybe next year, the whole product set would be defined as keeping the lights on because we reached that maturity state. And we would only need to support, some things with the operations team that is going on. But before that, we didn't really know where GeoData is sitting with different teams. It wasn't structured. It was causing, as I said, a lot of problems on the user experience itself, and actually some of it led to like some complaints and very bad user experience. So that's the starting state. It takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of buy-in from leadership to be patient enough for a couple of years to establish a data governance program. And that's why I added the slide to how to convince them. You convince them by presenting the risk, trying to quantify the risk, and even at an earlier stage, stating that not being able to quantify the risk is a higher risk in itself, because there is something that you don't really know how to quantify. It might be bigger than you would imagine, and so on. So yeah, but yeah, after 3 years, probably it went well. And I'm actually also working. So I just recently, like 2 months ago, doing this process all over again, but with visual content, with images, because also it's not as bad as GeoData, how it started, but again, there is no data governance for this type of data. And there is a lot of, business opportunities that are currently blocked because we cannot maximize the value of collectively managing and using this data. So right now we're working on building a new data governance program for this other type of data, which is visual, images and videos. So yeah, probably also the process could take like up to 2 years, 2.5 years. But yeah, that's what it takes to really maximize the value. Because, for example, in this age with all of the generative AI boom going on and machine learning is becoming more cool than ever and everything, you cannot really build any kind of machine learning solutions or these sorts of technologies with fragmented data that you cannot even sort to begin with. So yeah, I hope I answered your questions and I didn't go other ways.
Perfect. There is still one question left. We are talking about data quality.
Yeah.
How do you measure your data quality?
Again, this is one of the benefits of having domain experts managing the data itself, because defining the quality metrics for specific types of data is really relevant to each and every type of data. So it's not the same thing. It's not the same metric or the same equation to measure the data for images that could be applied to GeoData, for example. So I cannot say that there is one specific answer for how to manage quality, but that's the role of the domain expert to define the quality metrics and the equations to calculate them.
So this could be different depending on every single stakeholder.
Of course,
Yeah.
Of course, every single type of data.
Yeah, because you
Right?
treat it as a product.
Yeah, exactly. So you look at the data set from the perspective of this is a product on its own, but as a product manager, you're not expected to be, know it all and know everything, but you try to apply this framework and this process, and you're supposed to like push for domain experts to define quality metrics for this and how to manage it and how they're planning to work on it, because it's not your job as a product manager to manage the quality of data. Your job is to enable the domain experts to manage the data.
Yeah.
So you are an enabler, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nice set. I think these are nice words to wrap it up with. And thank you for your talk.
Thank you so
Very
much for
interesting.
having me.
And
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. And thank you, Martin, for hosting that Q&A. All right, wonderful stuff. Really insightful. Thanks again, Omar, for sharing your knowledge with us here at TechFest.